Welcome to Tales from the Waystone, a King Killer Chronicle reread podcast.
We are your hosts, Will and Phoenix. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Tales from the Waystone, Season 2, Episode 71, No Place Like Home, where we will be looking at chapters 141 through 143 of The Wise Man's Fear through the lens of homecomings.
As per usual, before we begin, a little explanation of the pod. Each week we will be examining a section of the Wise Man's Fear through a chosen lens and figuring out what we can take from the text and apply to our real lives. We will also take some time to focus on our phronemes of the week, and then a recommended thing of the week, and finally wrap things up with 7 words from the book and 7 words from our own lives. Before we begin, let's get some disclaimers out of the way. First of all, we are in no way affiliated with Rothfuss or his publisher, Books. Second of all, discussions naturally assume that you have probably read this book that we are nearly finished with, or you don't care about spoilers. Either way, spoilers. Lots of them. Also, word to our community, please be kind to yourselves, one another, and the creators of the worlds we love exploring.
All right, so in these 3 chapters, it's basically all denouement from all of the stuff that's come before.
Explain denouement.
This is basically wrapping up all of the little bits that have been seeded throughout the course of the book. From before Kvothe left, this is him tying up a bunch of loose ends.
So, we get the shortest chapter ever to explain how he got back from set piece to set piece. There's a little bit of storytelling in the journey home. It flavors it. It's like the sailors wanted to hear my stories and I made them wait a couple of times. They didn't believe that I was with the ADM. They did, however, want me to tell the body story a lot of how I spent time in the Fae with Felorian. He also says, though, and I think that this is a lot of character growth, I learned a goodly amount from them. They tried to teach me sailor's knots, but I didn't have the knack for it. And knowing Pat does not use words accidentally, and there's not a lot of discussion about knacks after the first part of the story, but I don't think he used this word accidentally.
I also think it's just Kvothe used to being the curse of the gifted kid, where if he isn't naturally good at something, he doesn't think that he'll ever be good at it.
The curse of the gifted kid is everything comes naturally that you're ever going to be good at. And it's not, oh, I need to practice this and I need to learn, which is actually something that I deal with a lot because there are certain things that I pick up pretty fast. It's gotten less and less as I've gotten older, but I think that that's natural. But like, there are definitely some things that I pick up quickly that I can intuit. But then there's things that I want to be able to do that with, and I just don't. Music is one of those things. I'm generally good with my hands and like mechanically I can draw, I can do a lot of things, I can paint, I can do a lot of things with my hands, including like putting in a new floor and using tools and all this other stuff. And none of that helps me with guitar. None of it. Like the fact that I am generally dexterous and articulate with my hands does nothing for being able to learn how to play guitar for me. It takes just the same thing that it takes for most everybody, time and repetition, but it takes more of that from me. Also, that's just the mechanics of it. And I'm not talking about like understanding it, understanding how the pieces go together. That is also something that I have always struggled with. And it is a testament to how much I want to learn it that I haven't just given up on it. Because I am used to being able to just look at a problem, see it as kind of a knot that needs to be untied, and setting to untying it. And I'm generally pretty fast and pretty good. Not great, and yes, practice would always make it better. But music is such a puzzle for me.
I think that's part of what I enjoy about it. It is, I think, for me, the experience of having a hobby that you enjoy even though you're not very good at it. And that's something that has taken me a while to get to. Like growing up as a gifted kid, when things came naturally to me, it was very easy. You know, I could do really well at this without having to do a whole lot of work, just relying on things that made sense to me. And if I ever ran into something that was a challenge for me, I just would look for excuses to not do it and then do the things that I was naturally good at. And I think like music is the first hobby I've had where I've been genuinely not good at it and still had fun. So yeah, it's hard to describe.
I do think that this, back to the story, is setting up a little bit because we know that Denna ties knots, specifically story knots, probably, into her hair, braiding them into her hair. We find that out in the next time that Kvothe encounters her. Told you, spoilers. And there is a fun bit that Kvothe, while not good at tying sailors' knots, has a pretty good success rate of untying them. Which, man, I really should put the attempt I had of just balling my yarn. Like, I had a nice fancy skein of yarn that I tried really hard to just be able to put into a ball a couple of weeks ago, and then I wound up having to share photos of how my day was going because, man, that took the entire day because it just turned into one gigantic knot. And not an easy to untie knot.
So, as Kvothe is traveling by map here, because this really is the travel by map montage at this point, he says that the friendship of the sailors, the song of the wind in the rigging, and the smell of the sweat, salt, and tar helped to ease his feelings of bitterness towards his ill treatment from Mayor Alvaron and Maelwyn. And it is true, I think, sometimes having that change of scenery and change of company can do a lot to help get over some of those things.
Time heals all wounds.
Or at least helps to ease the stinging of them. And it helps you to gain some perspective. That's really what he got out of this. It was perspective. That's what healed, not time.
Fair. There's a little tease that maybe possibly we'd be exploring more of Tarbean again from a completely different perspective because the ship did dock in Tarbean and then he has to catch another ship up the river to Imre. And part of me is curious, not from a storytelling perspective, but from a healing trauma perspective, because it's not even really been, more than a year and a half. Because it's been like 3/4 of a year that he's been gone, and then whatever amount of time he was actually at the university. And I'm not going to do all that math, but it's not been more than 3 years. And I know that for me, going back to places where there has been, unrelated to the physical space, traumatic events in my life, in some ways it can place you right back. And in some ways, having a different perspective, a different stage of your life, can lessen the sting of those traumas if you go back to them. But like, I'm going to be real here. I'm never going to go back to the Winco in North Spokane and feel comfortable. I'm never going to feel comfortable on the street that I lived with my ostensible parent. Like, those are just not places that are going to bring me comfort, and in fact will probably bring the opposite. But I don't have the same visceral reaction to the entirety of Spokane or the city that I grew up in or any of that. I just would be interested to see, as someone who is no longer looked at as a street urchin, that as someone who has means now, what the city is like for him.
I think there is perhaps a story to tell there. Though he's already kind of had that towards the end of Name of the Wind, where he went back and spent some time with Trappist.
That's what I'm thinking about. I was like, wait, I thought that there was a part of that. Okay, that makes way more sense. I was like, now, mind you, we've been reading The Wise Man's Fear for years.
It's been a while.
And the last time I read Name of the Wind was for the podcast. So forgive me, audience, for kind of forgetting which one ended in which way, because they're kind of similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess we already knew about the story knots. Did we know about the story knots? Is that coming up next, or is that coming up? Came up in the Wiseman, or did that come up in the Name of the Wind?
I think it's been something that's been woven like a knot throughout the entire thing. Like, he's mentioned Ylish story knots
But I'm talking specifically about seeing Denna with the knots in her hair.
I don't remember.
We'll find out. We don't have that much longer to read.
Yeah. So I think it's probably a storytelling choice on Pat's part. Like, he has this bit of geography that he knows he's established. He's got to go through it, but he doesn't really want to spend more time telling that particular part of the story since he's already gone over it. But it does get to an interesting bit where when Kvoth's ship docks in Emre and he steps off the boat and he crosses the bridge over towards the university, he suddenly starts to feel home.
He says, I've never in my life had anything like a home. As a young child, I grew up on the road, endlessly traveling with my troop. Home wasn't a place. It was people and wagons. Later in Tarbean, I had a secret place where 3 roofs came together and gave me shelter from the rain. I slept there and I hid a few precious things, but it wasn't anything like a home. And because of this, I'd never in my life enjoyed the feeling of coming home after a journey. I felt it for the first time that day. That is visceral. And not to the same degree, but in my memory, I have only ever owned one other house. I wouldn't necessarily at this point call it a home or a memory of a home because it was missing that element of comfort. And when Kvoth says home was people, the person that I shared that house with, that financial obligation with, was not a safe person. And so I would say that now, after having been a renter for most of my life, and even then, like the place that I had ostensible some control over how things were appointed in it, I didn't have a lot of my own personality in that space. But now we are living in a place that I do consider a home, right? Like, we have made choices with our space that maybe weren't designed that way when the place was conceptualized, like turning the master bedroom into our studio and choosing to use a smaller bedroom as our bedroom. But I get to have the things that bring me comfort surrounding me. I get to have the person that brings me the most comfort sharing the space with me. I get to have our cat, who has occasionally made an appearance on the podcast. I feel relief and comfort and calm in a way that I haven't before been able to feel those things.
So I think in Kvoth's position, the university and its surrounds are the places where he's been able to leave his own mark. These are places where he's been able to feel like he has a place. Like, everywhere else, he's been an interloper. You know, like when he's...
Sorry, I have to interrupt and just go, welcome to Night Vale, interloper. Go ahead.
So, like, growing up, he's on the road all the time. And for him, home is a moving target, so to speak. It's being with his family, but that's never going to happen again.
At least not those members of his family.
No. And, you know, when he was in Tarbean, he was scrounging and scrapping just to have a place where he was tolerated, if not welcomed. And, you know, he didn't have a whole lot of agency. In Imre and at the university, he's been able to find a place for himself where he fits within that overall ecosystem, whether that's in the fishery or at Anchors or at the Aeolian. You know, he's been able to find places that he's been welcomed. He's found people who welcome him. I think that's the big part. Like, I think it's telling that the first place that he goes when he finds that Anchors is locked up right now and he doesn't really have it in him to break in because he's loaded down with his travel sack and his loot case and Seisura, he decides the first place to go is Sim's room.
Before we go that far, I do want to call out that he mentioned the gray shape of the archives was rising out of the trees ahead of him. Again, the archives is a massive gray stone. You're not going to sway me off of that. He also says he was gone for 3/4 of the year. So I think he's nearing 17, technically, barring all of the time that he spent in the fight. And yes, first place he goes when he thinks about it is Sim's door in Muse. Boy hasn't told his friends that he's not dead.
Yeah. I mean, Sim initially is just shocked to see him because he's been operating under the assumption that Kvoth died in the shipwreck.
Because Ambrose is a
Deck.
that waited until right before the admissions testing to tell Sim that his friend died. Didn't actually die, but nobody knows that. Anyway, and
Yeah.
like, of course Sim's upset and shouted at him, and I'm wondering about everybody on that hall, right? Like, because you've lived in dorms.
Yeah.
You could probably hear conversations and or shouting matches from down the hall.
Even with contemporary construction methods, dorms are typically made by the lowest bidder and with the cheapest possible materials because they got to do it all in bulk.
Yep.
So those doors are not thick.
Nope.
And, you know, this is not even that. This is an old building, not a whole lot of insulation. I'm going to guess cavernous halls, so lots of echoes.
He says, a letter would have cleared things up, but I'd never thought to send one.
I know, right? In fact, my note on this was someone could have sent a letter, Quoth. Seriously. But I do love that Sim's immediate reaction is just to gather Quoth up in a great big crushing hug. Like those times when you see a friend that you haven't seen in a long time and you don't know if you're ever going to see him again. That's a powerful emotion there. I feel for Sim in this case.
Well, like, he thought he never would see him again because he thought that he was dead.
It's easy to forget, but like in most people's story, the shipwreck would have been a major set piece. In this case, it was just sort of something mentioned offhand.
Quoth doesn't like to tell how he gets from point A to point B unless there is some form of traumatic and or eventful, like, wow.
Shipwrecks, it just happens. Ships wreck all the time.
Oh, everyone should really listen to us especially, but like other people too, on Lock Stitch, because seriously, ships blow up all the time. But yeah, going back though to what's happened with Will and Sim, specifically Will in this case, Ambrose quite literally chased Will back home for a term. Like, Will couldn't handle dealing with the loss of his friend, the taunting of his enemy, and all of the stress, and he just went home for a term. Hopefully he's coming back today. Sim, on the other hand, finally made Rolar, but he was set back by this whole situation because finding out that your friend is dead is traumatic. I don't care. Like, Quoth, they care about you. Stop being a jerk.
Like we've said pretty often on this podcast, Will and Sim are better friends to Quoth than he is to them.
Yes. And then we find out something that's really cute.
Yeah, it turns out Fella, who had initially had a bit of a crush on Quoth, has come to fall for Sim.
I think that that's probably more temperament and age appropriate.
Yeah, I think she needs someone who is steady, and that describes Sim.
And Quoth is actually happy, like he's got compersion for Fella and Sim is just a little bit like, damn it, why are you back?
You're not going to make this weird, are you?
You're not going to take her away from me, are you? And I hate that. I really, because it assumes that Fella or other, like, in those kinds of conversations, it assumes that the woman involved in this has no agency or just settled, and I hate it. Like, she chose to date you.
Well, we saw the seeds of this when they were all spending time together in the archives, and Sim just randomly started reciting old poetry to her, and she thought it was really enchanting. Like, she started to enjoy Sim not as a consolation prize, but as a legit joy to be around. She found something in Sim that she'd been missing in her life, and he found something in her that he'd been missing. They fit. Simple as.
And then Sim says, I trust you, in a way that very clearly says, I don't trust you. All that said, Quoth then does a few little errands, including visiting the bursar, and we get a little tease about how Mayor Alvaron has okayed literally any amount.
Any amount.
For tuition.
Wink.
And so it seems inconsequential, or it seems a little bit like, where's this going? And Quoth just goes off to admissions. And this time, like, it's different because now he can afford to buy a meat pie and a mug of hot cider. He's kind of enjoying himself.
And he's also not worried about having to keep his tuition as low as possible. They can set the tuition at whatever they want, and it's not going to be the end of the world for him. It's not going to mean that he's stuck in some sort of usurious debt with Davy. He can just pay it.
There's a freedom. No, money cannot buy happiness, but you know what it can do? It can grease the wheels so much. Like, no lie, I have been lots of different places on the how much money I have available to me at any given point spectrum. I've been on a lot of that. Like, I have been in situations where when I grew up, there wasn't any money for food by the like 20th of the month, and I had to wait for 10 days for anything approaching a decent meal, to like I have had no income myself and was very close to living in my car, if not for the grace of friends. I have been in the I have to watch everything kind of situation. I can't just, I can exist, but I can't thrive. And that, I think, is the most of my life, was the exist but not thrive. I've been in the I can splurge every once in a while. And it's gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's not all been a steady climb. And now we're at a point where I can legit afford to buy things that are luxury items for the first time. And it's still kind of wondrous to me.
Well, and there's this freedom where he realizes that he does not have to scrimp and save for everything. He's actually able to afford decent clothes. He's actually able to know where his next meal's going to be from. He's not in desperation mode.
Or he has the freedom to just have his meal come from somewhere that he doesn't know where it's going to come from, but he's not afraid that it's not going to come.
Right. It's never a question of if. It's, wonder where that'll be.
And so he steps into the circle in front of the masters, and it turns out that they had also heard the news about the shipwreck, and they were surprised to see him alive. Most of them pleasantly so.
With the exception of Hem, of course.
Of course. And so we have a truncated list of all of the things that happened. Kilvin demanded that Kvothe come back to work. Mandrag and Dal and Arwyl argued about what courses I would take. I'm like, Elodin's just like, hi! And then the Chancellor got things under control. He answers Dal's questions and Kilvin's and fumbled his cipher with Brander. And then he didn't know the answer to Mandrag's question, and Elodin didn't bother. And Lauren asked a rather easy question. None of that part is making me think that there isn't just the Aemir. I really do think that Mayor Alvaron has something to do with the Aemir, and I think that Lauren probably has something to do with the Aemir, and that there is at least some dialogue happening where maybe now there's going to be more interest in Kvothe, like serious interest taken. And so that's why Lauren just is like, eh. And then he took a little bit of time answering Arwyl's question, and then Hem asks a question.
I love Hem's thing. I heard you were dead, and Kvothe's response is, I heard you wear a red lace corset, but I don't believe every bit of nonsense that gets rumored about.
There is absolutely some wish fulfillment in this, right? Like, all of us have had that person of authority in our lives that we would really like to be a smart ass to.
Yeah, there was someone at an old job that I used to work at who used to just nitpick everything. And
I've had that.
when she finally retired, I remember I wrote on her going away card, there's a typo somewhere on this card.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of this is written as though Kvothe is terribly embarrassed about his performance, that he did all these mistakes by accident, and then he goes and officially presents his letter of credit to Reem and unofficially collects the agreed upon cut, half of everything above 10 talents, because he was assigned a terribly high, stupidly high tuition, which is probably more of a deterrent to coming back. Like, they assigned it as a, we don't really need the money, but you're kind of a jerk and we don't want you here, of 24 talents, which from what I could tell throughout, like, I can't, I'm sure someone has done all the math on this, but is probably more than Foth has had the entire time in his tenure at the university. Like, he probably has never had that much money ever.
His trip to Ventus has been pretty profitable for him.
I'd say so. So then he goes back to Anchor's, very glad to find out that no one told Anchor about his death, because that means that his old room is still his room. It's all covered in a layer of dust, but it feels cozy and warm and welcoming in a way that the cavernous rooms of the mayor's estate definitely never felt. Like, he came back to the mayor's estate after a few months, and he's still like, this doesn't feel like my home.
I think, like we were alluding to earlier, at the mayor's place, he was always only ever a guest. And he was only ever a guest at the mayor's sufferance, so long as he was someone who was useful to the mayor. Whereas I think in Imre, especially with the people that he's found kinship with, he feels like he's actually valued as a person, not just as a resource.
He does say, I'd forgotten what it was like to be surrounded by the warmth of friendly faces. He does kind of look around his own room and goes, I'm not sure where I was in building or dismantling this harmony clock. There's just a couple of little things that are definitely mine. This feels like my space. And now I'm going to go off to another one of my spaces, which is the Aeolian. I'm going to see if Denna's walked by here in the last year. Nope. But more than that, Stanchion and Diok are friends now. Like, they are familiar with him and glad to see him alive.
I think while he's been on the road, he's had very few people who are genuinely peers, like people that he is on equal standing with. Like, he's had people that he's had good relationships with on his travels, right? So he built this friendship with Tempe, which is really pretty beautiful. And he's had this relationship with the other people in Edemre, particularly Vachette and Penta, and with Cheyenne, right? He's had good friendships with them and everything, but throughout all of that, he's been perpetually the outsider. He's been someone who is learning from them. He's been someone who is also, in some cases, teaching. But when he gets back to Emre, you have people like Sim, you have Stanchion, Diok, all those guys. They're people who are of a station with Kvothe. He feels like he is one of the gang. He's part of their regular lives and not just sort of a passer through. These are people who recognize him and are happy to see him. He's not having to prove himself all over again every time that he meets. It's sort of that absence makes the heart grow fonder thing. And I think that his time away has helped him to really appreciate these relationships that he's quite frankly taken for granted. Like, we know that he's taken Will and Sim for granted.
But at least they get a mention while he's away.
Right.
And then back to all the people that he needs to visit, say hi to, reacquaint with. Later that night, I climbed onto mains and made my way through a familiar maze of chimneys and mismatched slate and clay and tin. I came around a corner and saw Ari sitting on a chimney, her long, fine hair floating around her head as if she were underwater. I wonder a little at that description.
It is a little odd.
But we do have a picture, actually, that I'm staring at right now. Nate Taylor did for the Slow Regard of Silent Things, which, by the way, let us know if there's any interest in us going through that. But it depicts that so well because it also says she was staring up at the moon and swinging her bare feet. And then she starts talking with Kvothe in a way that says it's almost as though Kvothe never left. She's not mad at him for leaving or for being absent. She's not relieved at his reappearance. She's not treating him any differently than she treated him the last time she saw him. And I'm going to say this, there's some things that I've seen about how neurodivergent, how ADHD people, how autistic people don't see the gaps in time as being a slow decline in a friendship or a slow decline in a relationship, or like if I don't talk to someone for months, I'm not mad at them. I just haven't talked to them in months. And then the next time that we talk, it's as though there was no time between talking to them. There's no awkward pauses or silences or are you not my friend anymore? It's okay, I haven't talked to you in a while, but now I'm just going to send you a random meme and we're going to start talking about whatever again. Or every once in a while, my best friend will just text and let me know what's going on with her life, or I'll go and, send her an update on something that I'm making or a change of my hair color or whatnot. And it's almost like we never didn't talk.
Yeah.
There's no barriers there. And Ari behaves that way. Ari just picks the conversation right back up. But she does say, I missed you. She says, don't go away again. And Kvothe says, I don't ever plan on leaving. I have too much to do here. And she perks up and says, like, visit me?
We know that's not going to last, though.
Yeah, I mean, the framing device exists.
Exactly. Also, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the baby hedgehogs.
You're right. The baby hedgehogs, which one of our friends who is on one of those lovely text chains full of just memes where we just send photos back and forth and memes back and forth and whatnot. But if we sent her a just picture of baby hedgehogs, the first thing we'd hear back is, I need it.
Need a hedgehog. She has big druid energy.
Absolutely. And I think Ari does as well.
So then we get to chapter 143, Bloodless, where Kvothe returns to the fishery mostly because he's missed the work, not because he needs money at this point.
Which is such a freeing space to be in because, again, this illustrates how if you are a creative person, you have this war between being creative and earning money. Because the most creative things that you can think of might take time and resources and cost you money. But the thing that earns you money might not be the most creative or fulfilling work. And so he had to deal with that a lot. He made a lot of deck lamps.
At Stocks, he runs into Basil, who informs him that he's due for credit for the versions of the arrow catch that have been sold over the months. Turns out that after Kvothe left, Kilvin took Kvothe's designs and then turned them into something that could be mass-produced.
I do want to say something, though.
Yeah.
There's one of these little sentences that is definitely a Pattism.
Okay.
Proper artificing is like a song made solid. The work can be fulfilling in itself.
Yeah, I think there's something to that element of bringing something into fruition, of making something physical and tangible that can be incredibly satisfying, even if it's a known thing. Like Kvothe was making deck lamps, and it wasn't necessarily the most engaging thing, but I think he still appreciated that it was the work of his own hands that did it. And I think what we also get here is some of Kvothe's decisions early on to make it so that this would be something that is affordable.
You're talking about the arrow catch,
Yeah.
later named the Bloodless by Eladin.
By making the Bloodless into something that the average traveler could afford, it's actually been far more profitable than if it was something that was staggeringly expensive, because now it's putting this level of basic protection into the hands of the people who need it most. And by making it accessible, you can make a lot of them and make it up in bulk. As a result on this, Kvothe has been netting a tidy proceeds, and it breaks down to about 22 talents and 4. Not too bad.
That's almost the entire tuition that he wound up racking up by accident, purpose, something.
And one of the things that Basil notes is that this has become a commodity thing to build. The demand is high, and so a lot of people can make these. So there's enough demand for them that there's profit, but they're also intricate enough that they can be a fun challenge for students to build. And so, they're all kind of glad that they're able to do this. This is something that is yielding a benefit to the other artificers, not just in the monetary, but also in the practice of artificing. They're becoming better artificers because they're building this.
There's mention of how Manette never told Kvothe about this profit sharing deal, and that's actually because Manette has been there for 30 years and never once made anything that could have a patent. Nothing in his name. He just seems to enjoy the work. Now, I do have some questions about that. Like, is he more of a mysterious character than we know, or does he just really like being a perpetual student? Because either way,
I kind of get the sense that he's something of a grinder. Like, he likes the routine. He likes the business of being a student and making things. And he's a maker, not an inventor. Not everybody needs to be an inventor. And you can find fulfillment being an eternal student. I've known a few of those.
so have I.
If that's your path, that's your path. So after, again, weighting down his purse to the point where he's starting to feel like he needs his travel sack on the other side of his body to level out the load, he heads across the river, wandering by all the places Denna and he had frequented, of course, on his way to Davy's.
So he does knock on Davy's door. She answers, and I'm not sure if it's shock or what, but like she winds up reacting in this very robotic way that is kind of like, you all right? And Kvothe is like, okay, Banter, come on. And she had pretty much convinced herself that the entire group was going to be targeted for death, and that Kvothe was just the first one to die of the group that harassed Ambrose, because Ambrose could figure out where Kvothe was and like send pirates after the ship that he was on, which paints Ambrose as even more of a bastard than we already knew he was, because it would imply that he's okay with wholesale murder of an entire crew of ship people just to kill Kvothe.
And to be clear, I don't think she's inherently wrong about what he'd be willing to do.
Me too. And so she's just kind of like, I don't know what to do with this information overload. She's blue screening.
So they go and have lunch, and over lunch, she kind of slowly starts to put things together. I actually don't think she's entirely wrong, because there was that little bit when Kvothe is getting on the ship, when he's first hiring passage, that there's this guy just watching him, making notes. So, like, I could definitely see a case where Ambrose has hired someone to sabotage the ship.
There was also a guy watching on the way back.
Yeah.
Surprised there's no shipwreck there. So they get back to Davy's, and Pat does not write things by accident. Davy discovered that she'd forgotten to lock her door. No more mention at this point, but that's, again, no accidental sentences.
That's ominous. So when they get back, Kvothe gifts her with a copy of Kellum Tenturi that he'd stolen from Caudicus's library.
Or Selim Tincture. Who knows how that's pronounced? Probably Pat. Actually, I know that there is actually a thing where Pat goes through and pronounces everything. And I'm sure that that book is somewhere on it. I'm not bothered to go check.
That's fair. And he also pays off his loan with 9 talents. And Davy's like, you sure you don't want to wait till the end of the term to pay that back?
I'm going to go back on something real quick, though. I want to call out, again, no accidental sentences. After he gifts her with the book, he does say, not that I knew anything about alchemy, of course, in a way that says he knows more than he's saying. Anyway, right. There's a little bit of negotiation. Davy's not sure that she wants to take the talents. She's like, you have a couple of weeks left. You sure? I don't need it. You sure? I don't want to leave you penniless. You sure?
And this is where Kvothe realizes that Davy is really kind of hoping that he won't be able to pay back the loan so that she can actually get what she really wants, which are favors. That's what really makes her powerful.
That's what she really deals in. And he kind of has this moment of like facepalm. You don't really have a minimum amount that you lend out. Of course not. She assesses people to find out like where they're going to be over a barrel and willing to give her things in order to negotiate that debt down.
Those favors that people do for her are worth more than the ostensible balance of the loan, to her anyway.
And that's where we leave it.
So that you have Phronimos this week. Who'd you pick?
Everything's such a little vignette. There's no real focus on any given person. I think I have to go with Ari, though. Ari's thankful that Kvothe is back and picks up the conversation right where it left off. And then she does mention, hey, I don't like it that you were gone. Don't do that again. But it's not berating the way that Sim did, which is understandable. It's, you're an important part of my life and I want you to stay in it. It's a way to illustrate how important Kvothe is as a friend to her while making him feel comfortable and saying, hey, there's something that I'm interested in that I want to show you. Wanna? And I think that to me feels very much like something I want. I like being able to pick up that conversation again and not have to apologize for the length of time that there hasn't been any conversation.
I've got a few friendships that are kind of like that, where we'll go extended periods of time without speaking with one another, but we can pick up where we left off pretty much at the drop of a hat, and we're always glad to hear how things are going for one another and catch up, and it's pleasant. You have those friendships with people that you feel safe around. Like, you don't have to do the work of wondering, do they still like me or whatever? You know that they like you. You're just glad to see them. And after you do the initial catch up on what's happened since last you spoke, you then start talking about the things that are going on right now. And then it's just always that bit of being able to just be in the moment with that person. That can be a really nice breath of fresh air. So I think that's a good pick.
I do too. Anyway, I am curious about your recommended thing.
So I'm going to start this with a little bit of preamble. So back on September 30th marked the 20th anniversary of Mastodon's Leviathan album, which, for those not familiar, it is basically a psychedelic heavy metal retelling of Moby Dick, give or take a few other random songs here and there. I was able to see Mastodon perform the entire album in concert when they came through on tour with Lamb of God. And they've got a few other shows left on that. So if you're in a position to see that by the time this comes out, absolutely do it. It's totally worth it. But what it really gets to for me is listen to albums in the actual track order that they were published with, because there's a lot of art that goes into that. And especially when you look at older albums that were released kind of in the CD era and the vinyl era before it, you have a lot of these records where the whole album is stronger than any one song, and you can just kind of sit there and let the music just wash over you. And it's just a really unique and emotional perspective, and it lets the whole thing kind of breathe over you, and you have a full arc. Instead of having to have each song be a self-contained single, you're letting that whole thing tell a story and set a mood, and it has its own narrative peaks and valleys through the music. And I think that's one thing that we've been missing in the streaming era.
I'd say that it's also something that's been missing if you only listen to radio releases.
Yeah.
If you choose to listen piecemeal. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to your favorite song over and over and over again if there is a particular one that speaks to you, right? And I'm not saying that every time I listen to the albums that I love, that I listen from beginning to end. But I'll tell you this, going back to listening to things on vinyl where I cannot skip it has made me both appreciate certain songs more, taken songs that I don't particularly care for on their own and given me a different appreciation for them, but also in some cases made them tolerable.
And not even necessarily tolerable. Sometimes it takes these tracks and puts them into a larger context where they become not just tolerable, but indispensable to the full experience.
And enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I agree with you completely. Like, a lot of the things that I listen to on vinyl are soundtracks to video games or soundtracks to movies. And so that is a way to really get there is a story being told in this. You have to listen to it from start to finish to get that. But even in albums that are distinctly not set to a narrative, like, yeah, Blind Guardian has some stuff like that. Mastodon has some stuff like that where it's literally taking an interpretation of a story that already exists and making a concept album around it. But even in things that don't have a storyline, like a direct storyline, the album itself is a story. And you're right, it has that narrative peaks and valleys.
I think that while it can be fun to chop things up into playlists and things like that, there's something to be said for just sitting down and intentionally listening to an album all the way through.
Mixtapes have their place.
Yeah, mixtapes can be fun, but I don't think that they're a replacement for that full album experience. And I mean, granted, you can do what you want, right? I'm not saying that you have to do this, but I'm suggesting that it might be a lot more fun than just listening to whatever the latest single is.
I'd agree with that. There's a way that an album will set a mood. There's a way that listening to something from front to back and everything in between has such a different feeling. And yeah, track lists are decided, like the order is decided intentionally.
Yeah, it's not random. The band and their producers are typically having conversations about this, like what makes the most sense. Like if I'm sitting down and listening to this, where does this fit together? There's sort of an idea that this is meant to convey an emotional tenor.
There's a flow.
Yeah.
Even with things like greatest of albums, when they're put together, they're chosen generally in a way that I guess is meant to be a good listening experience from start to finish. Like, you wouldn't want to put something that is just absolutely jarring right after something that was incredibly smooth and calming, unless that is specific, deliberate, and intentional.
When you think about like a concert set, that set list is chosen in advance based on how does this fit the emotional arc.
And I will say, listening to live albums, much better experience if you listen to it in order.
Yeah. So like oftentimes, yeah, a concert set will be a grab bag over a band's history from their early stuff to their newest stuff. And they're typically trying to find things that fit together mood wise. So like oftentimes they'll start off with a really high energy song just to get the crowd up and going. And then as things progress, you'll start seeing more down tempo things as everybody's kind of easing into the mood of things, and then back up to something more swelling at the end to send people out on a high note. There's an art to that, and I think it's worth paying attention to that and experiencing that. So yeah, listen to things in the track order that they're intended. Give it a shot.
At least some of the time you ought to do that. Yeah.
Yep. So that brings us to 7 words.
I have the words from the book. I found a few that I like. A letter would have cleared things up. I almost chose that because we have been harping on this pretty much the entire time that Quoth's been away.
We know Quoth.
Needless to say, I was terribly embarrassed. Except he did it on purpose. I missed you. Don't go away again. I have too much to do here. It's a sweet little exchange from Ari and Quoth. Beats the hell out of deck lamps. And that wrung a smile out of me. Another little sweet exchange between Basil and Quoth. But the one I chose, Welcome to the Game, Thanks for Playing, from Davey.
It's a good one.
Quoth thinks he is very smart, and then he just quite often isn't.
Well, and I think this is him starting to realize that the game that people are actually playing may not be the one that everyone's explicitly stating that they're playing.
Also, there's something to be said about having the freedom and the space to think, because when you're that strapped, because, Quoth, Ledger, everything, super strapped, like when you're that stressed and that strapped. You do not have the capacity, the room, the spoons, the spell slots, whatever you want to call it. You do not have it to focus on other things, like trying to unpuzzle a puzzle.
Yeah. So I had 7 words from life, and I have poop has dropped off to guitar lessons.
Oh, God. Okay, we're going to have to explain this one. So, if you don't have a cat and you haven't taken them to the vet, you don't know that quite often your vet will ask you to gather a poop sample to make sure that they don't have parasites. And I have to tell this, I have to elaborate on this. So we took Sokka to the vet, poor little thing, yowled the whole way there, yowled the whole time he was there, yowled the whole way back.
He was not happy.
TftWS. We don't like taking him to the vet. He doesn't like going to the vet. Nothing bad happens at the vet. He just doesn't like it. He didn't like being in the carrier. He didn't like being in the car. All that stuff. Thankfully, this time he didn't pee in his carrier. Makes me very happy because he has previously done so. Now, we get sent home with a sample container to put poop in. And I don't care that it's October, it's sunny, it's still going to get hot in a car. And I asked Will to please, 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 please not leave the poop sample in the car. And so your response was, okay, I'll put it in the fridge at work.
Weirder things go into those fridges. I'm just going to say that.
I don't care. I don't want you to be that guy who puts your cat's crap in the work fridge. Why would you do that?
Because otherwise it's just in my backpack, and that's gross.
Yeah, but at least it's just gross for you.
I don't want it to be gross for me.
But it's gross for everyone.
Yeah.
Your name is on the collection.
I could have covered that up.
I don't care. It's just so gross. You do not put a cat poop sample in a fridge where people's food goes.
These are the same people who microwave fish, so.
But I don't care. You just don't do this thing. And yeah, you did drop it off right before going to guitar lesson. But, oh my God.
It was just too fun to put in. So anyway, with that, I'd like to thank you for potting with me.
Thank you for potting with me.
And thanks for listening to Tales from the Waystone. Join us next time on Tales from the Waystone as we discuss chapters 144 through 146 of The Wise Man's Fear through the lens of Closing the Loop.
We would like to thank our friend Shawnee Jang for their theme music.
And many thanks to Patrick Rothfuss for creating this world that we've enjoyed exploring.
Audio production, editing, and social media coordination courtesy of me, Phoenix McCullough.
And writing and project management courtesy of me, Will McCullough.
If you would like to help support us and have the means to do so, and would like to listen to more of us talking, maybe get some artwork from me, because that would be awesome if somebody wanted me to send you a random piece of artwork. Yeah. If you want to chat, patreon.com/waystonepod, and or our Discord. And with that, here's to one more day above the roses.
To one more day above the roses.
Ding! We started talking before we started recording, like I'd hate it. Because if we got into a flow and then I looked at the thing and it wasn't recording because we were impulsive.
But bad.
But I'm just letting you know that I will look at I will go very, very, very mad. It would not have gone well.